Politics Ignited, episode number 4. Let's do this.
This is Politics Ignited, where we're joined by exciting liberty-minded political activists from around the world, giving you the Ignite Nation direct insight into how they got involved in liberty, what they are doing now to fan the flames, and what you can do to light the fires of liberty. And now, your host, Todd Welch.
On this week's episode of Politics Ignited, we're going to have Talbert Black Jr. He is the chairman and president of South Carolina Campaign for Liberty, and I really think you're going to enjoy this episode. Some great information on directly getting involved on a local level and having immediate and lasting effects on politics in your area. So let's go ahead and jump right in, and I really think you're going to enjoy it. Today, my guest is Talbert Black Jr., and he is the chairman and president of South Carolina Campaign for Liberty. He's also the founder of Palmetto Liberty PAC. He was a speaker at the Liberty Political Action Conference in 2014 and is a software engineer. Is there anything I missed there at all, Talbert?
I think that covers it. Oh, I am an instructor for the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership as well.
Okay, excellent. And they basically go around the nation instructing people on how to be better political activists, correct?
That's right. Yep. Teach the tools of the trade, how to make politicians afraid of the citizens.
Yeah, it's a great organization. I've learned a lot from them as well and been to quite a few of their schools. So it's excellent that you're a part of that as well.
Thank you.
Why don't we go through, Talbert, how did you get involved in politics and the liberty side of politics in general? Walk me through your journey to getting to where you are today.
Sure. So I was raised in a family that was always politically aware. In other words, taught that I should vote, that's just part of being a good citizen. And so I did. My first vote was for president, and I don't think I've missed a presidential election. But, for a long time, I thought that was all that I needed to do, was just go and vote for the Republican president. However, it was the late 90s, probably. I returned to South Carolina. I'd been away for a few years with work and got involved with a state gun group. Defending the Second Amendment is my real passion and probably what motivates me more than just about anything else. And was invited to go to a committee hearing at the State House. And I was just really intrigued with what was going on. Not that I was really impressed, but just the whole approachability of being involved was very interesting to me. And so participated with this gun group for several years, calling my state rep, calling my state senator, encouraging them to vote the right way, getting frustrated with them because they weren't, and that kind of thing for many years until about 2008, maybe late 2007. Ron Paul was running for president, and I knew who he was from a friend of mine from years before. He was aware of Ron Paul, the congressman, and had pointed him out to me and talked about how he was the guy who always voted the right way. Even if he was the only vote, he always voted the right way. So I had been following Dr. Paul and knew who he was. When he ran for president, I thought, wow, this is great. We'll have a good candidate who can talk about the issues, but I never expected him to gain the following that he did, simply because he did always vote the right way, and that just was not popular. That just didn't attract crowds, but it did. And so I was really pleased with that. And of course, he dropped out of the race, but when he did, he took the money that was still in his campaign account and rolled that over into Campaign for Liberty. And I saw in Campaign for Liberty some of the tactics and teachings and tools that the gun group I was involved with used. And I didn't realize it at the time, but the foundation, the root of those tools came from this organization, Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership, that I'm involved in. So that's kind of how I got involved with Campaign for Liberty. And then it was just over the next year or so, I went from being just a member to being the state coordinator. And then last year, we incorporated and became an independent state group and licensed the name. And that just allowed us to do a little bit more with fundraising and things. And so that kind of brings me to where I am. But the thing that really gets me going is that I've learned how, through experience and then through the foundation, to get citizens directly involved with holding their personal representatives in government accountable for the actual votes that they take. Nothing else matters except holding them accountable for the votes they take, because that's what kills us or makes us free, one way or the other.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And it sounds like you've had a very similar path as myself. I came into it with Ron Paul as well. And as you know, and the audience knows, I was also a state coordinator for Campaign for Liberty here in Wisconsin, and learned a lot through the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership as well. Dig into just a little bit more for us. What are you currently doing in South Carolina with Campaign for Liberty? How are you holding the elected officials accountable, and how does that work?
Well, so it starts with planning what the issues are that are most important to the state and to the citizens, and that will help roll back government, because that's really what we're trying to do when you get down to it, is roll back the barriers to freedom, so to speak, that we have in the state. And so we go through a process of evaluating all the possibilities, because as an organization, you can't fight everything, because if you try to fight everything, then you really end up fighting nothing and nothing happens. So we pick we make a list of issues that we're going to be fighting. And in South Carolina, there was a huge push to raise the gas tax by our Republican governor, Nikki Haley, and our majority Republican Senate, and our veto-proof majority Republican House, all pushing for an increase in the gas tax. And so that was our big issue, was trying to stop that, which we did successfully stop the gas tax. But then it's much more than that, right? Because it's not just a vote. It's also holding them accountable for that vote, particularly during election season. So it's making sure that they can't go and vote the wrong way and vote against our liberty and freedom, and then come election season, go run and give their same, trite talking points that makes everybody think they're this great conservative Republican, and then get reelected and continue to vote in the General Assembly against our liberty and freedoms. So it was the gas tax was the primary thing. Because we've been pretty effective over the past couple of years with holding them accountable, and several have lost their reelection bids because of their votes that we've exposed. They also tried to pass a bill that would virtually stop what we do as an organization, that would require us to expose our supporters and donors to them, so that they could then take political retribution against our people that make what we do possible. And they do. So that was a big battle. Of course, gun rights is my number one favorite thing. And so we're involved in trying to pass a constitutional carry bill, which is simply, if you can legally own a weapon for self-defense, you should be able to carry it for self-defense. You shouldn't have to go and get, government mandated training and, the permission slip that says you can exercise your Second Amendment right. So those are the big things that we've been fighting. And then it's primary season in our state. We've got primaries coming up in about 35 days. And so our big push right now is simply making sure that we get the message out to the voters, how their representatives, how their senators have voted, so that they can then make the best decision they can on who they want to represent them. And it's simply about empowering the voters to go and hold their representatives in government accountable.
Okay, and it sounds like you're really focusing on state politicians, local politicians in your area. Is there a reason you focus on that versus focusing on federal elections like a lot of people do?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's two very practical reasons. One is, of course, we're a state-based organization, and so we want to focus on our state. The National Campaign for Liberty, of course, is more focused on what's going on at the federal level, and we follow their lead on that. And it's just a division of labor thing. But the second reason, which I think is much more important and much more powerful, is that we have much more influence over our local, particularly town, city, county elected officials, and state as well. We have much more influence over what they do than we ever could over the federal government. And it's simply a numbers game. There's our vote is a much higher percentage of, maybe the 5,000 that vote to elect a representative in a primary, and it's probably about that number, than the hundreds of thousands that vote to elect a congressman, or millions that vote to elect a president. So I think it's just a much more practical thing. Plus, you don't really run for Congress successfully until you have been in local government, whether it's state, house, or maybe a governor. And you don't get to be in the state house or a governor generally until you've been a county councilman or a school board member or some other. And so if we can affect those positions and who holds those positions, we have a much greater effect, particularly down the road, over who's going to end up being our congressman and who's going to end up being our president. So I think it's just a very practical thing that for the long run is going to be much better for freedom and liberty overall.
I agree. And so it's more of a trickle up liberty effect where a lot of people focus on just the presidential race. And I think someone who is interested in political activism on the liberty side of things can feel rather daunting when you're looking at the president and what can I do as one person. But if you really focus on state politics or even county or city politics, then you're talking about an official that you can literally go to their house and meet them, talk to them, and really have an effect on how they vote when you hold their feet to the fire, so to speak, on their votes and on what they're standing for.
Yeah, right. You can think of it as the local offices are the farm team for the higher offices, as a baseball analogy. And if we can control who's on the farm team, then we control who gets on the major league teams. And that's where I think we have the real power. And as you said, you can actually go and see these folks face to face. And look, you get 5 or 6 of your neighbors to call a school board member or a county council member or even a state house rep. That's a huge thing for them. And you can really have some influence and make a change with a much smaller group of people. And that's something that you can actually go and do without a lot of cost and without a lot of time investment and make a real difference.
Yeah. For example, I was a county board member elected for 2 years. And in that 2 years, I believe I only received 1 phone call.
Wow.
So if all of a sudden I was getting 4, 5, 6, 10 phone calls on a topic, I'm going to take notice in that really quick. So it's not going to take much to get the attention of an elected official on the local level.
Yep, that is right.
Yeah, so that's a big point, I think, right there is don't get overwhelmed by focusing on national level politics when sometimes it's even more important to focus on state level and county level politics, and a heck of a lot easier.
Sure enough. And if you look at just your property taxes, which is where we pay a huge amount of our income to the government, and where, let's face it, if you don't pay property taxes, you lose your property. And that all comes from your local governments. I mean, maybe there are some states where state government taxes property, but the federal government doesn't tax property. And generally, it's going to be your county and your school boards that are taxing your property. So that's where you need to focus.
Correct. You're talking about millions, if not tens or hundreds of millions on a local level that you can have an effect on.
Yep.
All right, so let's shift gears over to your Palmetto Liberty PAC. What is involved in that, or what is the goal of that political action committee?
Right. So a lot of it goes back to what you can and can't do as a nonprofit organization. Campaign for Liberty is a 501c4 nonprofit organization, which is simply an IRS tax code designation. But in practical terms, it means that we cannot get directly involved in the election or defeat of any candidate for office. We can't go out and say, as Campaign for Liberty, vote for or vote against. We do get involved in issue discussion, where we make sure that the voters understand where their candidates stand on the issues. And we do that, and that's very protected. The Supreme Court's ruled on that over and over again. It's pretty good protection. However, there are cases where we do want to go out and say there is a candidate or an incumbent. It's rare with an incumbent. We do have a couple that are good. We want to go out and say, hey, this is a great guy. Support, Senator such and such or Representative such and such, and donate to them, give them some money, that kind of thing. And so that's why we have the PAC. We're able to go out and do those kind of things with the PAC. And that's really the only real need that we have for a PAC. If it wasn't for that, then we probably wouldn't have it. But it allows us to do some of the things that we want to do that we can't do as a Campaign for Liberty organization. We are able to go out and do that with the PAC.
Okay. All right. So being able to donate directly to candidates where you can't with Campaign for Liberty. Now, some people might see that as a conflict of interest. How do you see that to yourself?
Conflict of interest between what? I'm sorry.
Between Campaign for Liberty, where you can't support a candidate, and also being a part of a PAC where you do directly support.
Yeah, right. So, of course, as a citizen, I can be involved in as many organizations as I want to, and it really comes down to the funding. When I go out and raise money for Campaign for Liberty, we are not taxed. We're a nonprofit, and all the money that we raise for Campaign for Liberty, none of that can be used to go out and directly try to elect or defeat a candidate. However, the money that we raise as a Palmetto Liberty PAC can be, but all that's reportable to the state through the State Ethics Commission. So any money we raise for the PAC, we have to report who donates it, how we spend it, who we give it to, if we give it to a candidate. So it's a difference in accountability and reportability, and everything else is just free speech and doing what you want to do as a citizen.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Anything more on the area of what you're currently working on before we move on to the next section here?
No, I think we've had a good discussion on that. Let's go ahead and move along.
Okay, excellent. So this section is a section called the Liberty Flame, where I ask our guests their thoughts on a topic or a headline that kind of has national attention right now and just get their Liberty perspective on the idea. So our Liberty Flame question of the week is, should churches keep or lose tax-exempt status?
Oh, wow. So that is a very good question. And and so it really comes down to a matter of free speech, because as I mentioned earlier, as a tax exempt organization, you cannot be involved in the direct election or defeat of any candidate for office. And it's actually pretty narrow. There's certain key words the Supreme Court has ruled you can and can't use: vote for, elect, defeat, those kind of words you can't use. The problem is, out of an abundance of caution, I think most of our churches take a complete hands-off approach because they don't want to lose their tax-exempt status, which means, they would lose a lot of money paying the government taxes on the donations that they receive. And I can understand they're not wanting to pay the government taxes on the money that you receive. But I think out of an abundance of caution, our churches just take a complete hands-off approach and try not to get involved in any political discussion whatsoever. And that's really not necessary. So I think that churches could do a whole lot more than they currently do. And I think we see that. A lot of the churches that are minority churches, they get much more involved in the political arena. And I guess sometimes we look at it and say, well, how can they do that? The government's just looking the other way. Well, no, it's because they just have a better understanding of what they can and can't do and are willing to go and get more involved. So I don't know. It's a good question. I think that churches don't really need to give up that status to be much more involved in the political arena than they are now, and still not have to worry about paying taxes to the government.
Okay, so you would like to see churches actually get a little more politically involved in terms of the issue.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they can completely legally and completely keeping their tax exempt status. They can get much more involved than they currently are now. And I think, like I said, it's just out of an abundance of caution and not really understanding maybe the IRS laws and just following tradition too long. But I think, yeah, churches absolutely should be much more involved in the issues of the day. I mean, gosh, if not the churches, where? I mean, that's the core of our moral foundation. And, I think our country has to be a moral country, or we lose our liberty and freedom. It's not really on the topic that you asked, but I think it's an important point that as we get further and further away from the Christian mandate to love your neighbor and serve your neighbor as yourself, the more we leave that, the more government fills the void. And I think that's a fundamental problem with our country, is that we, as individuals, have abdicated our responsibility to look after our neighbor and to take care of our neighbor and to feed the poor and the hungry. And as we've abdicated that, government has taken over. And I think that's our fault as individuals, and maybe our fault as the corporate church as well.
All right. Yeah, I agree. I think churches should keep their tax exempt status. And I would actually jokingly say that I think we all should get a tax exempt status.
Right. Yeah.
We definitely need to decrease taxes overall for everyone and every organization. Talbert, let's move into, how do you see other people being able to get involved the way you did? How would you help them get on a path? Because you're at a point where it almost sounds like you're doing this full time. Do you think to be effective, a political activist needs to do this full time?
So yeah, first I wish I could do this full time. I really love and enjoy it, being effective. However, it's not. I work a full-time job, and it's not necessary. I've been doing it part-time now for coming up on 8 years. So how do you get involved part-time and be effective? And it's really easy, and it's going to sound like a promotion for the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership. It's not, but the foundation is the only organization that I know of that teaches very simply and very directly how to be involved. And so first of all, I would encourage your listeners to go Google Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership and find a class that's in your area and go attend one of their one-day classes. It's a full day on a Saturday, but the foundation teaches very simple tools and methodology and tactics for how a very small group of people who are actively involved can affect policy in a very real way. And you know, it's really simple, but you have to understand those tools, and the tools aren't based on any particular ideology, whether it's conservative or whether it's liberal. They're tools. The liberals have been using them against us for the last 40 or 50 years. I think we've been a little slow on the uptake, but using those tools will allow you to be very, very effective. It's confrontational, and by confrontation, I don't mean going and yelling at a politician. That's really rarely effective, but it's confrontational in that every time they vote the wrong way on your issue, you make sure that the voters know, the voters have the ability to contact the politician and hold them accountable, not only during the legislative season when when their vote counts, but also during the election season when the voters' vote counts. And it's really as simple as that.
All right, and I agree. As I mentioned earlier, I've been through several of the FACL classes, as they like to call them, Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership. And in the show notes, I'll put a link to FACL so that people can check them out and hopefully attend a class in their area, because I agree that it's a great way to get started and learn the best ways to, even on a part-time basis, if you only have an hour a week, that's plenty to start getting involved. And they can find those show notes. They'll be at politicsignited.com/004. And yeah, that is definitely a great way to learn the ropes and learn how to get involved. Any other things you want to touch on, Talbert, before we wrap up the podcast here?
Sure. I think the solution to everything that's wrong with our country is citizen involvement. The reason we've come to the place that we are is that we, as a citizenry, have abdicated our responsibility to be involved and pay attention and understand what's going on. And the only thing that's going to fix that is citizens being involved. There's a lot of so-called quick fixes out there that people are pushing, whether it's a balanced budget amendment or whether it's term limits or whether it's Article 5 convention, or all of these things that are promoted as if we just do this, it'll fix everything, or it'll fix a lot of things. But none of that is going to work until we as a citizenry remain engaged and involved. So, be involved. That's all I can say. And like you said, it doesn't take a lot of time, but an hour a week, 30 minutes a week. I mean, heck, if it's just sending one email in response to a call to action that you have received from Campaign for Liberty or from the National Association for Gun Rights or from whatever your organization is that you're involved in, take the time, send the email, make the phone call, fill out the petition, which a lot of people think those are just some gimmick, but they really work. So be involved, be involved, be involved.
Agreed 100%, Talbert. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today, and the Ignite Nation appreciates it as well. Hopefully we'll help some of them get more involved and have an effect on their local politics. So thanks again for coming on, and you have a great day.
Todd, Thank you for being here. It was a real pleasure.
Okay, what did I tell you, Ignite Nation? A great interview there with Talbert. Some great information on how to get involved locally right away. That FACL, Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership, a great training classes that they put on, so check that out. The show notes will be at politicsignited.com/004, and you can get more information there. So again, I appreciate everyone out there in Ignite Nation. Keep lighting the fires of liberty around the world.